Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And I don't even know what this episode is going to be about. We're just kind of going to check in, touch base. It's been 3 weeks. And I won't even say that I've been on the sabbatical. I think I've just more so I'm like, what am I going to talk about? Do you guys find yourselves fishing for content that is edifying? Because I do. I find myself being online and trying to find wisdom, seeing a lot of new commentators. I feel like my algorithm has been pushing a lot of people who do the same work that I do. And I've always kind of been a little bit of a stickler. I definitely need to work on this, but I've been more I'm not going to say I've been more. I've always kind of been critical. And I'm like, oh, that was interesting, but not in depth enough, or I don't really know too much about that, but they're talking about it. And I love the video edits. And I've been kind of one of those people. But maybe I should be more friendly. Maybe I should make friends with people who do what I do because, are there some loopholes in my content? Probably not, and I'm going to say probably not because I don't really talk about things I don't know about, I'm not going to make a very wide take a large topic, the African-American diaspora and then just make it a 19-minute video and just give you guys some cute clips. I'm just not going to do that, I'm just not going to do that. But yeah, lately I've been present in life, I've been very in the knee deep, the depth in the know of my real life. And sometimes you can kind of get swept up, especially when you're talking about creativity and having a online platform or online presence. When you kind of reel back and kind of just start focusing on your own life and being present in life, I do think you can kind of sometimes find yourself in a space where you're like, life is here and it's to be lived and I'm present and I'm doing this now, and so priorities somewhat shift. But yeah, I do find myself, and I wonder, do you guys feel the same? Definitely let me know in the comments. Do you guys find yourself trying to find good content today? I do. I feel that for myself. I try to find I feel like the barriers to entry is just so low. And I also feel because we do be present in our real lives, people aren't really, I don't want to say doing the work, but I'm going to be honest, people aren't really doing the work of reading anymore. And it's not because I'm being critical. I'm talking about all of us, I think a lot of people are kind of busy in life, doing life, especially for a lot of people who do this work. I feel like they're a little bit older, or at least that's what my algorithm pushes. And I don't know. I think if you're not doing this as a full-time gig, it's not really paying your bills. It's kind of easy to kind of just pop in when you can, or just put something out there just to put something out there like I'm doing. But I do think that because of that, I think you have a lot of people who are just really touching the surface on a lot of different things that I feel, deserve a little bit more exploration and deserve a little bit more in-depth conversations and deserve a little bit more insight into the topics, that they're talking about. And I just think that work of research kind of gets lost when we're just kind of living life and we're doing this for fun. And I think that's why I've always kind of said hey, listen, this is a hobby for me. I enjoy doing this, I'm doing it because I love it, and that's always kind of been my foundation, because I just think when I present myself as, hey, listen, I am a literary teacher, right? This page is for the literary digest. I just think when you start kind of branding things is that, people have certain expectations of you, or at least I do. Do you guys have those expectations? Because I do. I feel like when someone comes out and say, hey, listen, this channel is about the insightful, whatever, the in-depth explorations of blah, blah, blah. I'm expecting the channel to give that, and, yeah, I've always kind of just kept it very much low key. Yeah, this is a hobby for me. When I can get to it, I'm going to get to it. But I won't be long, but I'll just say, I went to Joseph Beth. I don't even know if there's a Joseph Beth bookstore in ever. Is there a Joseph Beth in other places other than you know what I mean? I don't know. I feel like it's a pretty low key bookstore. I think it's local. But I went to Joseph Beth and I was looking at books, just enjoying my environment. You guys know that's my habitat. And I was really proud, you guys. Like a lot of the new books and a lot of the books that they had in there, I actually have. And even if I haven't read them, I just was really like, I had a proud moment, like I had a really proud moment because I'm like, I love being in the company of books. And I have most of these books at home. I thought that was pretty cool. Right now, you guys know last time I think I talked to you guys, I was reading How the Word is Passed. I didn't finish it, unfortunately. I didn't get a chance to finish it. I was at the part where he kind of talking about Angola, Louisiana state prison, and a lot of emotions there, a lot of like really, really crazy facts, like one being the rodeo show that they do in Angola where the prisoners pretty much wrestle with bulls for the entertainment of the Louisianians, and that was like, wow, and you can actually look it up. There was an article on Capital B talking about the rodeo, and just crazy, just crazy to know that like so much of this stuff is still taking place today. And just seeing how Louisiana State Penitentiary, like just how that prison is like literally a place for so many companies. You talk about prisoners having to be put to work for Kroger, you know what I mean? Or Publix, like that's the place, and it's crazy. There was actually a recent brawl, like it was the Cincinnati brawl, that's what they were calling it, and this white guy and these black people, I don't want to say black people, I feel like that was so like, talk about like language, but there was this fight, and it was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and everybody's drunk, right? And this guy, they're arguing, and this white guy smacks this black guy in the face, and it pretty much just escalates from there. Well, after the brawl is done, right, the black persons it was multiple people, right? The black persons are facing up to 30 years in prison, but the white guy was off with a misdemeanor. And like, it just was honestly like it was disbelief. Like, I understand the violence and like fighting someone, attacking someone, and like right from wrong, but I think at the end of the day, like 30 years for a street brawl, for a fight. Okay, I'm sorry, is this the president? Is this the president of the United States? Like 30 years is crazy. And, recently, I know we don't really talk about celebrity news as much, but y'all know, I'm not going to get on the high horse. Seeing how, P. Diddy got 4 years, which was like, that to me is just such a smack on the wrist. You know what I mean? Like, that's nothing. Like 4 years is crazy. And I don't know, you just can kind of see the justice system and just how crazy it is. And I feel like for a lot of people who are listening to me under the sound of my voice, like obviously, hopefully for you, I don't feel like this type of content reaches people who maybe have had that issue or maybe are on their way, like, but if it does, it's like, man, you just have to realize like being black in America, like you really do want to stay away from any type of criminality, you know what I mean? Because you will be scorned. So just kind of like, sitting with Clinton Smith's book, like that's kind of just like where I was in the book, and I didn't finish. And now I just kind of been browsing, you guys. I haven't like really delved into this one, but it's The End of Love, Racism, Sexism, and the Death of Romance. And when I'm like reading an introduction, which I really rarely do, I'm just going to be honest with you, like I just jump right into chapter 1. But when as I'm reading the introduction and just kind of sitting with this book, and like I've heard other commentators and essayists, recommend this book, as I'm sitting with this book, it's like I start to kind of have my own thoughts, which I think so much of the way we see the world is influenced by obviously our ideologies and our perspectives. But I think so much of it is like foundational and where you grow up, and, and I think there really is something in people who have the ability to be fluid in the way that they think and not be so definite, or conclusive about anything. And I don't know, I think that kind of thinking I think for some people they would say maybe it's insecure, it's unstable, but I think that there's just really something freeing in not being so attached to like any one thing. Now, obviously she's a sociologist. She's written this is research that we're talking about here. And I look forward to seeing it from a new perspective, not the whole thing of like black men are homosexuals and they're incarcerated and that's why black women are single and I really love her premise in just kind of talking about the origins of male domination and how a lot of Black men sought to reclaim that sense of power as they were economically deprived within American society after the feminist movement, as well as the civil rights movement, which gave a lot of women positions of power, right? And we talk about power, what we're really talking about is money, right? Women had the ability to leave marriages, they had the ability to start businesses and do them, you know? And so a lot of men obviously felt disenfranchised, right, by that, because, you know, to be married was to have a, you know, a personal X, Y, and Z person, right? And when you're divorced, or when you don't really have the opportunity to get married, or when you know, whatever the case may be, you will seek to kind of reclaim some sense of self, you know, and power. If it's not economic power, then in this case, she talks about this in the book, a lot of men went about reclaiming that sense of power by essentially tearing down women, right? And I actually watched The Color Purple for the first time. Don't judge me. I'm not gonna lie, I actually thought the movie was about slavery. And I don't know why. I think when I was a young girl, I like saw glimpses and I just kind of seen the clothing that they were in, and I don't know. Totally not about slavery, but just in the movie, you know, Harpo's dad was just telling him, like, I don't even know if that man ever had a name, Mr. That's what they called Albert. That's what his name was. But just telling him that, when he was married to Sophia, if you've never seen The Color Purple, I don't know the name of the actors. I mean, I know Oprah, but like, you know, and Whoopi Goldberg, and like, you know, no, I don't know any others. But anyway, in the movie, you know, he's just like, you need to hit your wife. Like, you need to beat her, you know, because she thinks too highly of herself. You need to take her down a peg. And it's so crazy, like reading this book, right? The End of Love by Sabrina Strings, and, you know, purchasing this and kind of sitting with her research from a sociological perspective, but also just kind of recognizing, like, obviously The Color Purple took place many years ago, right? Like, even in the setting, that was kind of like the intention. Like, she was still learning how to read and write, you know, and you just kind of see how these very harmful ideas and attitudes about women are passed down, right? Like, why was it a fundamental thing to say, hey, listen, she thinks too highly of herself, you need to tear her down? And so it's interesting when you fast forward today in modern day culture, and you hear, you know, a lot of Black women kind of sharing their stories about how they meet men who want to humble them, you know, how they meet men who feel like, you know, they don't, you know, want them to feel beautiful in their skin and love themselves, and they feel like they do need to be humbled. And, you know, so I just found that to be very, very interesting and very telling. And so you guys know I love to really connect the dots from history into modern day. But I think in all of our failure to progress, I think so much of it, I will always say this, I think it comes down to knowledge. I think in all of our praise and worship, I don't think there's anything wrong with being somebody who is active in their lives. You know what I mean? Like, I personally, I've never felt the need to market my faith, but it is such a fundamental, you know, aspect of like who I am, and you know, it's my foundation and how I move throughout the world. I can absolutely teach about African American history, and I can teach about racism, and I can teach about, you know, I can educate the little Black kids in the community, and we can teach them literacy, and I can create a podcast, and I can, you know, I can do all these things, and none of that makes me less of a Christian, you know. And I think somewhere along the way, so many people, and we talked about this before, but I just think so many people have been taught to believe that, like, in order to be a believer, you have to be so disconnected from the world. And I do believe that we are called to be God's vessels. And I do believe that we are called to, you know, be the city on the hill that can't be hidden. I do believe we are called to share the gospel, but I think that everybody's ministry is their own. I think it looks so differently for so many different people. Like, I personally feel like motherhood is my ministry, you know. I feel like it's the thing I've been graced to do. And, you know, but in addition to that, I think that, you know, I just don't feel as though we were put on this earth to kind of keep to ourselves. And, you know, I do believe in living your life in a certain way, you know, whatever that means to you. I think it's about being a person of integrity, but for somebody, it may look like going to the mosque every day, you know. So I just think that at the end of the day, there's really something about being a doer of the word, right? There's really something about being somebody who's like so active and present in your life. And there's something about somebody who stands for justice. You know, a lot of people talk about the Proverbs 31 woman, and it's always kind of like this thing of like, oh, you know, she's got businesses. She's got businesses, she's got sackcloth, and she's got real estate. Okay. What are y'all doing? Right. But there's really no mention of how she, in the Bible, it says, right, in Proverbs 31, like, she gives a voice to the voiceless. And I feel like that's me, like, like that's me. Like, I feel like and so I say that to say, I think it's very interesting just how people interpret things differently. And I just think, I don't know. I just felt the need to say that because I feel like there's always these conversations about like being a believer and like differentiating yourself from the world. And I just think it's all about like how you move. Like, do you really practice that thing? You know what I mean? Because if you practice that thing, then, hey, listen, you know what I mean? People are going to be like, oh, yeah, you're a kind person. But it's like, oh, okay, this is what you believe. This is what you stand on. And let me see how you move and live your life. I don't always think it has to be a thing of like, we're all in robes and we're sitting in church. Of course, if that's your religion, if that's, then do you, right? Like, that's what you practice. But I'm just more so talking about people who, just day to day and they feel like they have to kind of live their lives in a certain way. And they have to present themselves in a certain way and they can't talk about certain things. I have no hate in my heart for anyone. Me teaching history is not the equivalent of me hating white people. You know what I mean? That's not absolutely not, and people like to say things like, well, I feel like these conversations are divisive. Well, I'm just teaching history. I'm just reading books and sharing what it is that I know. There's really nothing divisive about that. Like, I'm not here to say, listen, this is what it is. And this is why like, I'm not even coming from that perspective. You know what I mean? Like, at all. At all. When I go out in the world, I have a sense of awareness. But you guys want to know something? There was a moment where I had went to this mega church, and I wasn't really seeking anything. I just went to this mega church. I just was like, I'm looking for a new church home. And do you know, the first time, like, I walked in there, first of all, my mouth just hit the floor because I just couldn't believe, like, I've never been in a mega church. I didn't even know they had mega churches in my city because here I am thinking this is just a small town. And absolutely not. It was just completely fully loaded or whatever. So I sit down, I take my seat, and, I'm here for the word. I'm here for worship. I'm here for praise. And we're getting in the sermon. I'm noticing all the props on the stage. I'm like, this is kind of too much. We don't really need all of this for praise and worship. Like, I don't need all I don't need all the props and the stage. Like, I don't need the stage presence to just hear the word. Like, just preach the word. Like, let me just get this revelation. But anyway, I moved past that. I moved past like this mega church or whatever. I just like, whatever. Okay. And so, he brings up this photo of Thomas Jefferson, and he talks about how Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, but he was forgiven for his sins. And I'm like, whoa. Like, wait a minute, and there's all these black men in the front row. And like, there's kind of like this sense of awkwardness where it's like, I don't even want to say awkwardness. I think there was just a moment of apprehension where you have people who are like, well, wait a minute. What do we do with that? Like, this is a very weird place. Here we are, with this man. Obviously he's a white man. He's in a position of authority, right? He's a pastor. He's preaching the word. He's, and then it's like, he goes and he says this, right? And so I don't think that it's so much divisive, but I do think that there should be an awareness about the insensitivities, and how people do that, or how any one person does that in terms of like education and religion and our faith and all of the things, right? Like philosophy in totality. I don't think that should be the critique, right? When we're all just trying to get it right and live together and be in harmony and be in peace with one another. I think there are so many moving parts and factors in that. And I share that story to just say that I personally know that that's why the work that I do in terms of education, African American history, and all the things, literature and culture, right? I know that this is my gift to the world, in my own little right, in its own little way. Like, I feel like this is what God has put in me to do, and it doesn't look like being in a church or it doesn't look like that, but the work is just as meaningful and God is with me, and if it's not what he wants me to do, then we won't be here, but I just say all that to say, I think that for so long, African-American people have struggled with their sense of identity, as being African-Americans and experiencing discrimination, right? Experiencing the love that they have for their white brothers and sisters. Some people have married interracially, right? Some people have, white people in their life. And I don't want to say white people because that just sounds so harsh, but like, we have people of different races in our lives that when may love and we may adore. Right? Some of us have been adopted. Some of, like there's so much nuance. And you talk about nuance. I'm using this in the sense of like real life. You know what I mean? Like when you've had exposure, when you've met people, you actually start to realize that, it's all about how people are brought up, and it's all about how people are taught to see one another, and it's all about exposure, right? It's all about exposure. So you don't have any like hate for people in your heart. And I think that's always kind of been a thing that has been misconstrued, especially when the burden rather of education has been placed on African American, and more specifically African American women, right? And none of that is true. And I think that's why we had so many conversations around James Baldwin, right? Baldwin being who Baldwin was, especially as a prolific African American writer, and him having a white partner, right? Same thing with Nikki Giovanni, right? Her her passing, everyone's like, wait a minute, her wife was white, And so it's like, I think that this is the crux of it all, right? Like you kind of start to realize that, like, well, it's not necessarily hatred. I don't think it ever was. I think it was just to say, hey, listen, I have something important to say. I know something. And, this is how I've got through this and how I got to the other side. Let me help you. Let me teach you about the things that I've learned about, what has taken place within African American history. And I don't think we can ever really have enough African American scholars or enough conversations about, African American history, because it is the one thing that we are not taught. And I know for so many people, it's like, well, it's divisive, but I don't think anyone really sits and like reckons with the fact that like African American people, if anything, we make up the majority or if not half of the American population. And for so many people, there's all these stereotypes about us, and nobody knows who we are, why we're here, you know what I mean? And we are not looked at as our own culture. We are not studied. I think that within American institutions, I think every culture should be studied. The Caucasian culture, okay, the Caucasian race, all right. And I know we kind of look at it from an anthropologic point of view. But I just think at the end of the day, like everyone has their own culture, and that's not a bad thing. I feel like the only culture that we really acknowledge within our society is Hispanic culture, and we don't do that with so much divisiveness, but we don't acknowledge anyone else. And so I don't know. I just think it's pretty cool learning about, history and learning about why things are the way they are. I do think that the more that I think that you kind of move past the rage. I think you move past the any resentment, tensions, or frustration. And I think you move past all of those things. And I do think you reach a point in your life where you kind of find peace on the other side. You know what I mean? Like, I think there really is something so peaceful and so riveting about like moving through culture and through history. Like you can sit with the images, you can sit with the context, you can sit with the text and all the things. And you can hold great reverence for what it is that we've endured, and you can respect African American people, and you can respect the struggle, and you can respect the success, and you can get some things and you can be present in your culture. But at the same time, you're not bound to any one thing. And you start to kind of realize, like, at the end of the day, people are just people, and you can sit with the fact that, like, okay, well, there are some good people in there. I don't want to say good and bad. That's just way too rudimentary, or I'll say elementary in terms of thinking, because I don't think that anybody is like all good, and I don't think anybody is all bad. You know what I mean? I do think there are some like bad people, but I do think, like, as we know, when we start thinking about people's conditioning and all the things. But I don't know, because now let me not get too far into that. I think you have people who choose to do what they want to do. Let me just say that. There you go, right? You have people who choose to do what they want to do, right? As God says, people have their own, there's God's will and then there's our will, right? And so people just choose to do evil, and they choose to do these things. And I think with anything that becomes repetitive or affirmed, you derive some sense of validation or affirmation, right? Just from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's fundamental, right, to the human to have certain things be met. And so I think the more you do something, whether good or bad, and you're affirmed in it, and you get, validation, and there's dopamine, and there's some type of like, chemical release for the thing that you're getting validated for, I think you'll just keep doing that. And it's kind of like your faith, right? For people who are like, oh, I don't really believe in Christianity or whatever. It's not to say I'm here to convert you. That's not what I'm saying. But I will say, it's like, when you start to pray, right, you start to, read your Bible, and you have these moments where you'll have these very profound, right? And it's almost like it's cerebral, it's spiritual, it's metaphysical, and you like, oh no, God is real. I know God is real, and then when that happens repetitively, when that happens, like when prayers go out and blessings come down, okay, hallelujah. Then you start to put this thing into practice, and you start to say, okay, this is real, and I think it's the same thing for someone who is murderous, or someone who is, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, okay, if I can attack a person and I can, like it's sick, but at the same time, it's like, it's the, like you see that it's working, it's validating, it's affirming. And I think that if that's all then that's all and that's what you do, So that's my take on people, but I don't think that it's, any of those things. But I also don't think that there's anything to apologize about, in terms of being somebody who, really appreciates the work of African American scholars, and someone who really appreciates Black history. I don't think there's anything to be. I don't think we need to be apologetic about that. I think owning your story and like who you are as a person, and having an understanding of where you come from, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. People can say, well, Black people don't have culture and all these different things. Well, I mean, I think it's a very ignorant thing to say. Everybody has culture. Like that's what America is. It's one big melting pot. How do you think we got to be the melting pot? You know what I mean? Like everyone's kind of bringing their own baskets to the potluck. And we know that, our Caucasian brothers and sisters are bringing their own, that potato salad is not the same as our potato salad. And it's not just, and to say African Americans don't have culture, we'll start with the food, right? Do we cook like Hispanics? No, Hispanics have their own thing. And so I just think ultimately, we kind of have this thing where we're just, I think as long as we continue to disregard African Americans, to disregard or disrespect rather the African American experience, and to negate, to acknowledge that African Americans do indeed have their own culture, I think the work will always be necessary. And I think that we'll continue to learn, grow, and I think it's, it'll just be, our work will just be continuous, because I don't think you get to erase us, and I don't think you have to. I don't think, well, there are some people, yes, who are advocating for reparations and all the things political, but I think, at its core, fundamentally, I don't think that most African American people, I think that's a big, that's a thing that's really misconstrued, I think that's a thing that is really, really, really misconstrued. I think ultimately it's one of those things to where I don't think that African Americans are asking for any of that. I just, they're just saying, hey, listen, acknowledge that I have a culture, acknowledge that my people have a past, right? And acknowledge that we're here. And that's it. That's just acknowledgement. Like they say that, I heard a preacher actually say this, it was T.D. Jakes. He said, and this is when I used to listen to T.D. Jakes. I hope that man is doing all right. I used to love his sermons. I heard a lot of bad things about him, but I'm just going to be honest. I think when you're a church, when you're in the, like, you just have a completely different standard, right? Like, for example, and I don't even want to veer, but I'm going to talk about what I learned from T.D. Jakes and say, like, what I was going to say. But first, I just want to stop here and say the standards are crazy. Like, obviously, when you're talking about being a preacher, you are saying that you are one with holiness, right? You are hearing from God directly. You have a landline to heaven. You know what I mean? And you come on here on Sunday, we're expecting to hear something. But I think that we do need to kind of start to look at, what does that really mean? Like, I think we should really start to reassess how we see church, how we view our pastors, you know what I mean? How we view people. Like, I don't know what it should be. If I had to sit here and kind of like ponder and maybe really explore some ideas of how we can kind of engage with church to avoid a little bit of this church hurt, to really kind of overcome these things. And most importantly, guard our hearts. I think you can kind of start to look at church as communion, as fellowship. I think when you start talking about your relationship with the pastor and him being one with holiness and having a direct closeness to heaven, I don't know. I don't know. I think we all have that same level of access. And I think if we can kind of reckon with the fact that we too have that same level of access, you know what I mean? Now, the pastor should be someone who's maybe a little bit more biblically literate. I definitely agree to that. But I just think in terms of the weight, right, the pedestalization that we put on pastors and ministers, I just think we have to stop doing that. Like, I think in all the ways that we may idolize celebrities and have I think it's the same thing with our pastors. Like, I think if someone is like, hey, listen, I want to do this work for whatever reason, obviously we know some people who are not, but I think for the sake of this conversation, I'm really not trying to veer into the space where I'm like, man, we shouldn't critique pastors, or and I say that because it's true, you guys. Like, I heard Stephen Darby say this, like, we just don't go this hard for celebrities. You know what I mean? Like, I was thinking about this the other day when, like, the whole Cardi B thing popped up and she's pregnant by her boyfriend that she's only, like, and I'm like, it's crazy how, she gets to be put on the pedestal because she has money. But this is listen, a couple women like this who around the corner, all right, they got their children. I'm just saying, I'm not here to say that that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, listen, it's some women like that in real life. Got one on the hip, one in the bun. All right. And it's craziness. Okay. And y'all wouldn't be listening to her. If that woman today it's a whole lot of Cardi B's. All right. If she came in here today, y'all would not be listening to her, but you're listening to her because she has money. That's what it is. And it's like, you've got this attitude that, like, she's successful or that she's X, Y, and Z, And so I just think, for me personally, it's just one of those things to where, I just find that to be very interesting. I just think we don't hold pastors in the same contempt that we hold celebrities. Like, celebrities are always forgiven. Pastors are not. And so I don't know. I think for me personally, as someone who has worked through church hurt, who has been burned by religion, but who has always had a real relationship with God, I think for me, it really does just look like I'm just not putting them on a pedestal. I'm going to hear the sermon. I'm going to hear the word, because I believe that the word is, what does God say? He says that the word is alive. He's the living word. There we go. Sorry. And maybe that was Fred Hammond who actually said that. But I'm going to go because I'm here to receive and rejoice, with my brethren. All right. But in terms of, like, the people and I'm not getting into that. I'm not getting into that. I don't know you. I don't know you. God bless you. But I don't know you. We still have to be, like, guarding our hearts with humans, because humans are humans, and I don't mean, like, guard your heart. Like, don't just I'm not saying don't trust anybody. And I'm not saying be on the tip of, like, you can't trust anybody. You need to go. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, at the end of the day, I just genuinely think that people could have better foundational spiritual beliefs if this is your path, if Christianity is your thing, like, if Christ, Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. Obviously, this is not for everybody, but I just feel like you could have such a better walk if you just learn things, if you learn some things, if you apply some things, and if you start to live more authentically, and more in alignment with, like, who you really are. I feel like God can meet you in that, versus trying to be who other people think you should be. Religion is something, honey. It is something. It's like just enough, but never fulfilling, I'm going to go. I think that was the end of my conversation. That's my little bit of update today on today's podcast. I hope you guys got something from this. I hope that you got something from my mini sermon, because that's really what it gave, my mini sermon. But yeah, let me finish up what I said about TD Jakes. He just was saying that the fundamental thing of relationships is acknowledgement. Like, if you can't acknowledge someone, then, like, you can't really be in a relationship with them. And that's the reference I was making about African-American people and our need to just kind of brush over the history and rewrite and erase CRT. Like, that's not the solution. It's just acknowledgement. I think that's all African-Americans have been asking for. You know what I mean? That's it. Just acknowledgement, plain and simple. Like, nobody's asking you to go back and rewrite and undo. Nobody's looking at you like you are the slave. Like, nobody's doing that. Nobody's looking at you that way. We might be curious who your people was. You know what I mean? We might be curious where you come from, but that doesn't mean that I want to harm you. That doesn't mean that I want to retaliate. And it's just always kind of been that way. And so you really get to kind of the root of a lot of this and why the work is continuous. And it's because racism is persistent. That's really why the work is continuous. There's not any one thing that we are doing. I don't think it's the language. I don't think there's any, it's focusing on that's not any, none of that is true. Right? The problem is the lack of acknowledgement for African-American people and what we've endured. And that's not for everybody. Obviously, there are a lot of people who have acknowledged us and they're allies and they're, And it's not even just allies. There are people who are just good people and they get it. And they, like we can relate. We're American, right? We can kind of get to that part, right? And we're human and we're mothers and we're fathers and you know what I mean? We're sisters and we're friends and we're brothers, But I just think until we can even really start to have like a real relationship, I think you have to acknowledge that it exists, that things did happen to Black people. And I think people who do acknowledge that, I think they make the best friends. Like, nobody's asking you to rewrite the past. Nobody's asking you to, no, nobody's asking for any of that. So those are some of the misconceptions about the work of African American scholars. Nobody's asking for that. We're doing what we do because we exist, because we have a right to liberty and to education. Peace.